Welcome to the HFY Tales channel. Remember to like and subscribe if you like the story. Enjoy and take care.
Eldric's arrival at the edge of the Arinder forest was met with the weight of tradition and the watchful eyes of the elven guards, each one clad in gleaming armor, faces half hidden beneath ornate helmets. The air was thick with the scent of pine and ancient magic, an invisible barrier marking the border between human and elven lands. Only a select few humans had ever been allowed past this threshold, and even fewer had lived to recount the experience. Eldric adjusted his cloak and stepped forward, his heart steady but mind alert. As a diplomat, he'd dealt with high kings and noble lords, but nothing could have fully prepared him for this. The path that wound through the forest was lined with silver-barked trees, each one aglow as if infused with moonlight. He felt the eyes of the elven sentries upon him, assessing his every move, his every breath. After hours of cautious travel under the guidance of his silent elven escort, the trees opened into a wide glade, revealing the heart of Arinder. Eldric's breath caught as he took in the towering city of Valeris, an elven citadel nestled among colossal trees whose canopies formed a natural shield above. Each building seemed a part of nature itself, living wood twisted into elegant structures, entwined with shimmering vines and glistening crystal windows. At the citadel's center stood the Great Hall, where Queen Eloria resided. It was a structure of ethereal beauty, an architectural marvel that seemed to defy gravity, suspended among the branches with winding staircases carved from the trees themselves. A pair of imposing guards led Eldric to the Great Hall, each step echoing with a reverent silence. The hall's doors parted, and Eldric was ushered inside. At the far end of the room, upon a throne of living wood and crystal, sat Queen Eloria. She was everything the rumors had whispered and more, regal, with piercing emerald eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of ages and golden hair that cascaded like sunlight caught in a gentle breeze. She watched him with an intense curiosity, her gaze assessing but not unkind. "Welcome, Eldric of the human realm." Her voice was a melody, calm and clear, but carrying a weight of authority. "We seldom grant such access to outsiders. Speak, and let us determine if your presence here is a worthy cause." Eldric bowed deeply, showing respect without overstepping. "My queen, I bring greetings from the King of Lorinder, and come as a friend, not a trespasser. Our kingdoms have long kept to their boundaries, but I believe we share a common interest in preserving the peace that lies between us." The queen tilted her head, a subtle smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "Human ambitions often differ from words of peace, Eldric, and yet you speak of unity." He felt the weight of her scrutiny, a trial by gaze alone, yet Eldric's resolve held firm. "The world grows smaller, my queen, and challenges have begun to emerge from beyond our borders. Our enemies care not for the divisions between human and elf. I offer my sword and counsel as a gesture of goodwill, that we might face them together." A murmur rippled through the room, the gathered elven advisors exchanging glances, but the queen's attention remained solely on Eldric. Her gaze softened slightly, though her voice remained cool. "Your words are bold, human. We are a people steeped in tradition, wary of outsiders. Yet I sense a sincerity in you." Eldric dared to meet her gaze directly, a risk in any court, let alone an elven one. "I speak not only for my king but for myself. I've long admired the beauty and wisdom of Arinder, and I wish to see our people learn from one another, not stand at odds." Queen Eloria's expression shifted, a hint of surprise flashing across her face before it disappeared. She leaned back, fingers steepled. "We shall see, Eldric. For now, you are granted permission to remain in Arinder. But know this, your words are seeds, and only time will reveal if they bloom true." As she dismissed him with a slight wave, Eldric felt a lingering glance follow him as he exited the hall. The queen's intrigue was undeniable, and Eldric knew that his time here would require every ounce of his skill, and perhaps more. It had been mere days since Eldric's arrival in Arinder, but already whispers began to ripple through the elven kingdom about the human diplomat's presence. Eldric had spent the time observing the elven way of life, marveling at their synergy with nature and their disciplined order. However, peace was short-lived. The tranquility was broken when scouts arrived, bearing news of Orcish tribes encroaching on Arinder's western borders, their encampments edging dangerously close. Eldrick was summoned once more to the Great Hall, where Queen Eloria and her advisors gathered to discuss this pressing matter. A palpable tension hung in the air, the usual grace of the elves replaced with grave concern. It became clear to Eldrick that, though the elves were adept in combat, the Orcish numbers were overwhelming. This was not a simple skirmish. It was a full-scale invasion threat. Queen Eloria, standing at the head of the council, glanced toward Eldrick. "Our scouts report that the orcs grow bold, perhaps emboldened by rumors of elven reluctance to ally with others. We could drive them back, but the cost may be great." Eldrick, reading the gravity in her eyes, stepped forward. "Your Majesty, I understand the pride of the elven people, but orcs are not easily intimidated. I have fought alongside soldiers against such foes, and I would be honored to offer my counsel." The room fell silent. Eldrick could feel the wary eyes of the elven advisors upon him, their expressions unreadable. Finally, Queen Eloria nodded, a spark of reluctant acceptance in her gaze. "Very well, Eldrick. Share with us your experience. How would humans prepare for such a force?" Eldrick spent the following days working alongside the elven military leaders, reviewing strategies and coordinating preparations. Though at first the elven generals were skeptical of his human tactics, Eldrick's knowledge of Orcish tactics and battlefield strategies quickly gained him respect. He introduced formations and defense techniques unfamiliar to the elves, who typically relied on agility and precision rather than endurance. Through these hours spent in council and on the training grounds, Eldrick frequently encountered Queen Eloria. Each encounter seemed to deepen their connection, a shared purpose blending with a mutual curiosity. During one evening session, as Eldrick was finalizing battle formations, Eloria approached him, watching quietly as he worked. "You command with confidence," she observed, her tone admiring but guarded. "It is unusual for a human." He smiled, meeting her gaze. "Humans often find strength in our unity, and sometimes in desperation. But here in Arinder, your people show a kind of harmony with nature that I can only admire." Eloria's expression softened, and for a brief moment, Eldrick glimpsed vulnerability behind her commanding demeanor. "My people have thrived in these forests for centuries, but times change. There is strength in humility, in seeking aid where pride would once deny it." Eldrick threw himself into preparing the elves for the impending battle. He trained their soldiers in defensive tactics, forming alliances with skilled archers and sword masters, blending their natural talents with a resilience they hadn't needed to practice before. He grew close to Captain Thyriel, a seasoned elven warrior who once doubted him but now became a trusted ally, marveling at the depth of Eldrick's resolve. Eldrick's efforts did not go unnoticed. Among the soldiers, whispers began to circulate about the human diplomat who fought and trained alongside them, with the Queen's watchful eyes often nearby. And with each passing day, Eldrick felt a renewed sense of duty not only to his king, but to the people of Arinder, and to Queen Eloria. The eve of the battle arrived, and the army of Arinder stood ready, their hearts steadied by Eldrick's presence. That night, Eldrick found himself alone on a balcony overlooking the vast forest. The moonlight bathed the trees in a silver glow, casting an ethereal beauty across the kingdom. Queen Eloria approached him, her steps silent as the night itself. She joined him, her gaze distant as she looked out over her people. "Tomorrow we test the strength of this alliance," she said softly. Eldrick turned to her, the warmth in his gaze softening the seriousness of his expression. "We'll fight and we'll win, together." For a moment, the Queen's guarded exterior seemed to crack. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and an unspoken connection that had grown between them. "You are different, Eldrick. You remind me of what we may yet become if we look beyond ourselves." He reached for her hand, hesitant but bold, intertwining his fingers with hers in a gesture that felt both forbidden and perfectly natural. "After tomorrow, perhaps our worlds won't seem so different." She did not pull away. Instead, she held his gaze, and in that moment their connection solidified. It was a silent promise, a shared bond that surpassed words, forged by the threat of war and the hope of peace. The first light of dawn crept over the forest, casting an ominous glow across the gathered army of Arinder. Elven warriors stood in perfectly disciplined ranks, their silver armor gleaming, faces calm but tense. Eldrick took his place alongside Captain Thyriel, whose respect he had earned through days of grueling preparations. Though he was an outsider, today he stood as one of them, a human shoulder to shoulder with Elven warriors, ready to face the oncoming horde. Queen Eloria addressed her people from atop a high platform, her voice resonating through the ranks. Today, we defend not just our land, but our legacy. Together, we fight as one. And today, for the first time, a human stands with us, bringing strength and unity. Let this day be remembered as a testament to the power of what we may yet achieve. The Elven warriors, typically silent, let out a cheer of approval. Eldrick could feel the weight of their trust pressing down on him, but he embraced it, the thrill of battle sharpening his focus. His gaze drifted to Queen Eloria, their eyes meeting for a heartbeat, filled with silent understanding. The orcs arrived with brutal swiftness, their guttural war cries echoing through the forest. A mass of roaring, tusked creatures charged forward, armed with crude but deadly weapons. Eldrick shouted commands, coordinating defensive lines as the first wave of orcs slammed into their ranks. His earlier training had prepared the elves for this brutal onslaught, and they met it with a resilience and unity rarely required in their isolated lives. Eldrick fought among them, his sword flashing, parrying, and striking with calculated precision. He was swift and fierce, weaving through the chaos, guiding soldiers into defensive formations that held the line against the relentless orcs. The elves, emboldened by his presence, fought with renewed vigor, their admiration for this human warrior clear in their shouts and nods of encouragement. High above, Queen Eloria was no mere bystander. She descended into the fray, wielding a staff of enchanted crystal, her magical attacks slicing through the orc ranks. Her spells sent waves of energy rippling across the battlefield, buying precious seconds for her warriors to regroup and press forward. Though the queen's power was formidable, Eldrick couldn't help but glance her way, his admiration swelling as he watched her command the battlefield with grace and ferocity. At one point, an orc brute broke through the line, charging toward Eloria with a bellow of rage. Eldrick didn't hesitate. He sprinted across the bloodstained earth, his focus singular, blocking the brute's path with a raised sword. The two clashed, and the brute's strength nearly overwhelmed him. But Eldrick held his ground, maneuvering with the agility and precision he'd honed over years of training. With a final strike, he brought the orc down, and for a moment, he and Eloria stood side by side, their breaths heavy, their eyes locking in a silent acknowledgement. As the hours wore on, the battle grew fiercer, but Eldrick's strategies were paying off. The elves had learned to fight in defensive formations, using coordinated strikes and ambushes that threw the orcs into disarray. For every wave of orcs that surged forward, Eldrick's tactics repelled them, draining their forces while preserving the elves' strength. Queen Eloria fought tirelessly alongside her people, her magic ebbing and flowing in sync with the rhythm of battle. At times, she cast protective spells over Eldrick himself, as though a subtle bond had formed between them, one that had blossomed into a shared reliance as they defended Arinder. Finally, as the sun sank low, the orcs' forces faltered, their numbers dwindling under the relentless assault. One last charge from the elves scattered the remaining attackers, sending them fleeing back into the forest. A triumphant cry erupted among the warriors, filling the air with relief and pride. The battle was won. Eldrick found himself surrounded by exhausted but grateful elven soldiers, their faces bright with hard-won respect. Captain Thyriel approached him, bowing his head with a rare humility. "Today, you fought not as a human, but as one of us. Arinder owes you its thanks, Eldrick." But his gaze drifted past the captain as Queen Eloria approached, her eyes shimmering with a mixture of gratitude and something deeper. In front of her people, she extended her hand to Eldrick, an unprecedented gesture for an elven queen. "Today you have proven your strength and your loyalty," she said, her voice carrying both authority and warmth. "Irinder's debt to you is one I will not forget." Eldrick took her hand, feeling the warmth of her touch and the unspoken connection that had grown between them. Their clasped hands drew murmurs of approval from the surrounding elves, and as they looked into each other's eyes, a silent understanding passed between them. They had forged a bond, one that went beyond the battlefield, rooted in trust and in newfound respect for each other's worlds. That evening, the victorious army returned to Valaris, where a celebration awaited. Eldrick, though weary, found himself restless. He wandered through the forest alone, processing the day's events and the unexpected camaraderie he had found among the elves. He was no longer just a diplomat from a distant land. He was, in many ways, now a part of Irinder. He didn't hear her approach, but as he gazed at the stars above, he sensed her presence. Queen Eloria stood beside him, her face softened by the gentle moonlight. "It has been many years since we have known the gratitude we feel tonight. And you, Eldrick, you have become more than a mere visitor to us." She paused, as though searching for the right words. "I had forgotten the strength of unity. You reminded me, and for that, I am grateful." Eldrick turned to face her, feeling a warmth that went beyond the simple pride of victory. "It's an honor to fight for something greater than myself. I've never known a people as noble as yours, Eloria. And you are more than I ever imagined." For a moment, silence settled between them, deep and profound. The unspoken connection, forged in battle and understanding, grew in that stillness. They stood close, closer than ever before, their breaths mingling in the cool night air. Then, without a word, she reached out, brushing her fingers against his hand, a quiet invitation, a promise of what might come. And as they stood beneath the stars, Eldrick knew that this bond, born of respect and shared purpose, had already become something far more precious than either had foreseen. The victory over the Orcish invaders marked a monumental shift in Irinder. As the evening settled in, the elven city of Valaris transformed, vibrant lights illuminating the trees and paths, a celebration woven into every corner of the enchanted forest. Musicians played elven melodies, their haunting beauty drifting through the air, blending with the laughter and songs of the people. Eldrick walked among the revelers, greeted with nods and gestures of respect from the elves he had fought beside. For the first time, he felt truly accepted, no longer the outsider in their world. But even amid the festivities, his thoughts drifted to Queen Eloria, whose presence he had grown so accustomed to. Though they'd fought side by side, there remained an unspoken distance between them, one Eldrick yearned to close. Later in the evening, as the celebration wound down, Eldrick received a message from one of the Queen's aides, requesting his presence in her private garden. He arrived to find Eloria seated on a stone bench beneath a flowering tree, its blossoms glowing faintly under the moonlight. She looked up as he approached, her serene smile a rare glimpse into her softer side. "Join me," she said, gesturing to the bench beside her. Eldrick settled next to her, close enough to feel the warmth of her presence, yet respectful of her space. For a moment, they sat in silence, listening to the gentle rustling of leaves and the distant echoes of laughter. Then Eloria spoke, her voice softened by the vulnerability that had come to linger between them since the battle. "You have given much to my people, Eldrick, more than I ever expected," she began, her gaze thoughtful. "In you, I see a strength that is unfamiliar, yet comforting. Humans and elves have lived so separately, and yet you remind me of what we could be together." Eldrick's chest tightened at her words. He met her gaze, feeling an intensity that surpassed anything he had ever experienced. "I feel the same, Eloria. My time here has shown me a world that I could only dream of. And yet, in that world, you are the one constant that draws me back, again and again." She looked away, a faint blush coloring her cheeks, an expression he'd never seen on her before. "Do you not worry, Eldrick, that our worlds are too different, that this connection is nothing but an illusion?" He reached out, placing a gentle hand on hers, the warmth of their touch sending a shiver through him. "I've faced battles, seen lives lost. But this, Eloria, this is real. More real than anything I've known. And I believe that you feel it too. Eloria's hand remained in his, her grip tightening slightly, as though drawing strength from him. "You're right," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "In my long life, I've known duty and tradition, but now, for the first time, I wonder what it would mean to live for something else, something that I choose, something or someone." Eldrick felt the weight of her words, the quiet bravery it took for her to speak them. He knew what she was risking by revealing herself in this way, setting aside centuries of custom and restraint. Slowly, he brought her hand to his chest, letting her feel the steady beat of his heart. "Eloria, we are different, yes, but perhaps our differences are what make us stronger together." Her eyes softened, and a quiet smile spread across her lips. "You speak as though you have the wisdom of an elf," she teased gently, though her tone carried genuine admiration. He chuckled softly, but his expression grew earnest. "I have much to learn from you, Eloria, but perhaps we can teach each other." Silence fell between them once more, but this time it was comfortable, filled with a shared understanding. The gap that had once seemed unbridgeable now felt smaller, their differences no longer a barrier, but a foundation on which something precious could grow. Eldrick felt the urge to close the distance between them, to press his lips to hers, but he held back, sensing that this moment required patience. Instead, he brushed a gentle thumb over her knuckles, a touch that spoke of his respect, his desire, and his unwavering commitment to her and her people. Eloria's gaze met his, and he saw the spark of vulnerability there, a glimpse of the woman behind the queenly facade. In a soft, almost fragile voice, she whispered, "You have become dear to me, Eldrick, in a way I cannot explain, but I fear what lies ahead, the challenges we may yet face, and the pain that could come from this bond." Eldrick leaned closer, his voice steady. "We will face it together, whatever comes. I swear it, Eloria." She exhaled, a soft breath that brushed his cheek, her eyes closing briefly as she allowed herself to lean into him. For that fleeting moment, they were not a queen and a diplomat, not an elf and a human, but simply two souls, bound by something greater than themselves. Eloria opened her eyes, her expression shifting as a quiet, unspoken desire flickered in her gaze. Perhaps, then, we should live in this moment, unburdened by what the world might say. Eldrick's heart pounded as her words hung in the air. He felt her hand shift, intertwining with his fingers, and the magnetic pull between them became undeniable. Their faces were close now, breaths mingling in the cool night air. She leaned forward, brushing her lips lightly against his, a tentative gesture that held centuries of restraint and longing. He responded, his kiss gentle, but filled with all the affection and respect he felt for her. For a moment, time stood still, the rest of the world fading away as they lost themselves in each other. Then, she pulled back, her gaze softened but resolute. "We must go slowly, Eldrick. The path we walk is uncertain, and I am still queen." He nodded, his voice hushed. "I understand. Whatever pace you set, I will follow." Their hands remained clasped as they sat in silence, savoring the quiet companionship they had found. It was the start of something fragile, yet strong, a bond that bridged not only two worlds but two souls. The days following their quiet moment in the garden were marked by a subtle but undeniable change between Eldrick and Eloria. Their conversations grew deeper, layered with shared glances and unspoken warmth. Though their interactions remained professional in public, the bond they had formed was evident to those who observed them closely. However, their closeness had not gone unnoticed by Arinder's Elven Council, whose members had grown increasingly wary of Eldrick's influence. Whispers circulated through the halls of the Great Hall, questioning not only Eldrick's presence, but the intentions of Queen Eloria herself. One morning, Eldrick was summoned to a council meeting. The summons was abrupt, lacking the customary formality he had come to expect, and as he entered the council chamber, he felt the weight of many gazes upon him. The room was filled with the Queen's advisors, chief among them Lord Phaler, an elder and a staunch traditionalist who had voiced his opposition to human alliances in the past. Queen Eloria sat at the head of the table, her expression calm but her eyes betraying a hint of tension. Eldrick inclined his head in respect, addressing the council with his usual poise, though he sensed the scrutiny from each member. "Eldrick," Lord Phaler began, his tone polite but laced with caution, "we respect your contributions during the recent conflict. However, concerns have arisen regarding your prolonged stay and the, shall we say, closeness that has developed between yourself and our queen." The statement hung in the air, sharp and pointed. Eldrick felt the eyes of the council upon him, waiting for his response. He glanced briefly at Eloria, who gave him a reassuring nod, her silent support strengthening his resolve. "I understand your concern, Lord Phaler," Eldrick replied calmly, his gaze steady. "My intentions here have always been diplomatic, aimed at forging an alliance that would benefit both our peoples. My respect and admiration for Queen Eloria extend beyond personal sentiment. They are rooted in the value I see in a united future." Another council member, Lady Myrtle, raised a delicate eyebrow, her expression unreadable. "Diplomacy is one thing, Eldrick, but alliances of the heart, that is another matter entirely. Irinder is bound by traditions that cannot simply be set aside." Eldrick nodded, choosing his words carefully. "Traditions are indeed sacred, my lady, but sometimes the strength of tradition lies in its ability to adapt, to grow. Queen Eloria and I share a respect, one that was forged in battle and tempered by shared understanding. If that is not enough to open a path forward, then I will abide by your decision." As Eldrick's words settled, Queen Eloria rose, her posture regal and her gaze unwavering as she addressed her council. "Eldrick has shown nothing but honor and respect during his time here. He fought for our people when he had no obligation to do so. His presence here represents the possibility of unity that we have too long ignored." Her words sparked a murmur among the council members, some nodding thoughtfully, while others exchanged skeptical glances. But Eloria continued, her voice filled with quiet conviction. "Our people have thrived in isolation, yes, but the world changes, as do its threats. Eldrick's presence is not a weakness. It is an opportunity for strength, a strength born of unity rather than division." Lord Phaler's gaze hardened, though he kept his voice respectful. "Your Majesty, we understand your vision, but emotions, as noble as they may be, should not dictate the course of our people's future. We ask that you consider the weight of this bond and the example it may set." Eloria met Phaler's gaze, her expression resolute. "It is precisely because I consider the future of Irinder that I choose to follow my heart as well as my mind. The council's judgment is wise, but my will as queen remains." The council meeting ended with a tense silence, and Eldrick left the hall feeling the strain of the unyielding elven traditions that he had challenged. Outside, he found Eloria waiting for him, her face softened by a weariness he had not seen before. "You spoke well, Eldrick," she said quietly, her voice tinged with both pride and a touch of sorrow. "But I fear that words alone may not be enough to sway them." Eldrick smiled gently, reaching for her hand in a rare display of intimacy. "We knew this path wouldn't be easy, Eloria, but I am willing to wait, to prove myself, if that's what it takes. I would rather walk a difficult path beside you than an easy one without you." Eloria's gaze warmed, her fingers entwining with his. "Your presence has reminded me of the courage it takes to make choices beyond the bounds of tradition. Yet, it is strange, I feel both strengthened and vulnerable in ways I've never known." Eldrick placed a hand over hers, his expression tender. "In my world, love is a strength, not a weakness, and I believe that our bond can bring that strength to your people too." They walked together to the garden where they had first shared their private moment, the moonlight casting a soft glow over the blossoms. As they stood beneath the flowering trees, Eloria turned to him, her gaze filled with an emotion she could no longer conceal. "Eldrick," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "if we choose this path, there will be sacrifices, challenges beyond what either of us has faced. Are you certain that this is the life you wish to embrace?" He reached up, brushing a stray strand of her hair behind her ear, his touch lingering as he looked into her eyes. "I have never been more certain of anything, Eloria. Whatever comes, I am here, for you, for Irinder." With that, She allowed herself to lean into him, her head resting on his shoulder as they stood in silent communion. In that moment, they were bound not by titles or duties, but by a shared promise, a love that transcended their worlds. As the night deepened, Eloria pulled back, her expression resolute. "Then let us face this together. The path may be uncertain, but with each other, we will find a way." Eldrick nodded, his own determination mirrored in her gaze. They would walk this path, challenging tradition and defying expectations, for the chance to build something new, an alliance forged in love and a future guided by hope. Despite Queen Eloria's clear defense of her bond with Eldrick, resistance among Erender's traditionalists only grew. Rumors began to circulate through the kingdom, whispers that questioned Eldrick's intentions, painting him as an intruder seeking to exploit their queen's heart for human gain. Small acts of sabotage and subtle hostility followed him wherever he went, whether it was elven craftsmen refusing his orders or council aides deliberately delaying messages meant for him. Eldrick endured it all with patience, refusing to be provoked. He had anticipated resistance, but he hadn't expected the deeply ingrained mistrust that seemed to fester among even the common folk. Only in Eloria's presence did he find solace, her steadfast loyalty a reminder of the reason he remained. He found himself standing ever taller, for her and for the bond they were building. One evening, during a council gathering, Lord Phalar formally challenged Eldrick's role in Erender, publicly questioning his intentions in front of the Queen. "Eldrick has no place among us," Phalar announced, his voice cold but respectful. "While he may have proven himself on the battlefield, his continued presence threatens our traditions and stability. A bond with him endangers Erender's legacy." Eloria's eyes narrowed, a dangerous glint of defiance flashing within them. "Are you questioning my authority, Phalar?" she asked, her voice quiet but firm. Phalar held her gaze, his stance unwavering. "I am questioning whether the desires of a single heart should steer the fate of an entire kingdom. We have thrived alone, without outside influence. Why risk our future now?" Eldrick stepped forward, his tone controlled but unwavering. "I do not seek to change your people's ways, Lord Phalar. I seek to stand beside Eloria, to learn from your people, and to share in a future that respects both our worlds. If you see that as a threat, then perhaps it is fear, not tradition, that drives you." A murmur spread through the council chamber, the tension palpable. Eloria's gaze softened as she looked at Eldrick, her respect for his resilience clear. "Our path is not one of fear, Phalar. It is one of strength born from understanding. Erender will not turn its back on allies simply because they come from beyond our borders." Though the council reluctantly conceded, Eldrick's defiance did not go unanswered. Later that night, as he walked alone back to his chambers, he heard a rustle in the shadows. Instinctively, he drew his sword, senses heightened. Just then, a shadowy figure lunged from the darkness, blade flashing in the moonlight. Eldrick barely managed to parry, the force of the attack sending him stumbling back. His attacker moved with elven grace, but their strikes were fierce, revealing a deadly determination. Eldrick fought back, each clash echoing through the quiet night. He managed to disarm his attacker, pinning them down with his sword, and as the figure's hood fell away, he recognized Liran, an elven guard loyal to Phalar's faction. Liran spat in defiance, his voice dripping with contempt. "You poison our queen's mind with your human weakness. Erender doesn't need you." Eldrick's grip tightened on his sword, his gaze fierce. "I have come to respect your people, to fight for them, and to honor your queen. Yet, you betray your own loyalty by acting against her wishes." The guard fell silent, and Eldrick released him, signaling to the other elven soldiers who had arrived to take him away. The attempt on his life confirmed what he had suspected. His presence was seen as an existential threat by a faction of Erender, and they would stop at nothing to sever his bond with Eloria. When word reached Queen Eloria of the attack, a rare anger flared within her. She met with Eldrick in private, her expression both pained and fierce. "They have no right," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "To harm you is to dishonor me. Yet they fear what they cannot control, and it has blinded them to the future I am trying to build." Eldrick took her hands in his, the warmth of her touch grounding them both. Their fear may not be misplaced, Eloria. I am different, an outsider. Perhaps I am asking too much, standing here beside you, hoping to bridge a gap that has been closed for centuries. She looked up at him, her gaze fierce with determination. No, Eldrick, you ask nothing that I do not freely give. My people must learn, as I have, that strength is not born from walls and boundaries. It is found in courage, in love, in unity. In a quiet voice, Eldrick spoke words he had longed to share. Then let me be the first to prove that bond, Eloria. Let us stand together before your people, openly, so that they may see this is not some passing fancy, but a true alliance. Eloria's expression softened, her hand reaching up to caress his cheek. Then let them see us together, for I will not deny the truth of my heart, nor will I allow fear to drive me away from what we have found. Days later, Eloria gathered her people in the heart of Valeris, calling an assembly to address the kingdom. Eldrick stood beside her, the tension in the air thick with anticipation. Eloria spoke with calm authority, her voice carrying across the crowd. My people, you have long thrived in peace, untouched by the ways of the outside world. But times change, and with those changes come new allies, new possibilities. Eldrick, who stands beside me, has not only fought for Arinder, but has captured my heart. A ripple of shock and murmurs spread through the gathered elves, but Eloria held up a hand, commanding silence. I do not ask you to understand my choice, only to respect it, as I have respected our traditions all my life. Eldrick and I represent a bond that seeks to unite rather than divide, to build a future based on trust, not fear. Eldrick felt the weight of their gazes, both supportive and skeptical, yet he stood firm beside her, unwavering. He looked out over the crowd, meeting the eyes of those who had once doubted him, hoping they would see the sincerity in his own. As the silence settled, a young elven woman stepped forward, her voice soft but carrying conviction. If our queen has found honor and love in a human, then perhaps we, too, can find it within ourselves to see past our fears. Her words set off a chain of voices, some of them beginning to nod, others hesitant but contemplative. The tension began to ease, and Eldrick felt a surge of hope. Perhaps they had finally taken a step toward bridging the divide. That night, as they walked through the now silent city, Eldrick turned to Eloria, his heart brimming with gratitude. You risked so much for me, Eloria. I vow I will never take it for granted. She looked up at him, her expression filled with quiet pride. I chose this path not only for you, but for Arinder. Our people must learn to see beyond themselves, and if our bond is the spark that brings about that change, then it is worth every risk. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her close, their bond strengthened by the trials they had faced together. Then let us walk this path, side by side, and prove to them that love and unity are forces greater than any tradition. They shared a kiss, sealing their commitment not just to each other, but to a future that transcended fear and division. As the night deepened, they knew the road ahead would not be easy, but together, they were ready to face it, forging a legacy that would redefine Arinder for generations to come. In the weeks following their public declaration, Arinder remained divided. Though some had come to accept Eldrick, a large faction within the kingdom resisted, fearful that their queen's bond with a human would disrupt the sanctity of their elven heritage. Eldrick often overheard whispers as he passed, and while some voices were filled with wonder, others carried distrust and resentment. Queen Eloria, resolute as ever, met each act of resistance with calm determination, working tirelessly to prove that their bond did not weaken Arinder, but strengthened it. She held open councils, where elves could voice their fears and frustrations. Eldrick joined her at these councils, standing as a visible reminder of the bond they were forging. Some voices softened, others grew louder, but through it all, they stood united. As the kingdom grappled with its internal divisions, a new threat emerged. Neighboring realms, led by ambitious leaders who saw Arinder's turmoil as an opportunity, began pressing against Arinder's borders, testing its defenses. Rumors reached them that these factions planned to invade, hoping to exploit the kingdom's weakened state. Eloria met with her council, including Eldrick, to discuss a course of action. Though her advisors advised caution, suggesting they fortify their borders and await the threat, Eldrick proposed a more proactive approach. "We cannot afford to appear weak," Eldrick argued, his voice steady. "If we show them our strength, they'll think twice before advancing. I have allies among my people who would come to our aid, should we need it." His suggestion was met with hesitation, especially from the council's more conservative members. But Eloria saw the wisdom in his words and backed him. "Eldrick speaks the truth. If we wish to preserve our sovereignty, we must be prepared to defend it. Together, with the aid of those who stand by us, we will protect Arinder." Reluctantly, the council agreed, though a tension settled over the meeting, as if the councilors feared this alliance would bind them more tightly to human kingdoms than they wished. As preparations began, Eldrick trained alongside the Elven soldiers, introducing them to human battle tactics while learning from their own unique methods. The camaraderie among the troops deepened, a shared purpose uniting them against a common threat. Even Captain Thyriel, once skeptical of Eldrick, grew to respect him, watching with approval as he fought and strategized with their forces. In these moments, Eloria would often watch from a distance, pride and affection in her gaze. They shared quiet conversations and stolen moments, reassuring each other amidst the rising tensions. She confided in him her fears, not of the coming battle, but of the uncertainty within her own people, of what might become of their alliance if war tested their resolve. "You have united them, Eloria," Eldrick would remind her, his voice filled with conviction. "They will see your strength and rally behind you, for you are their queen, and I am here, by your side, as I vowed." Their bond became a pillar for both of them, a constant source of strength as they faced the trials together. Though many eyes still regarded them with suspicion, they became a symbol of hope for those willing to look beyond old biases. The day of the confrontation arrived, and Arinder's forces assembled at the edge of the kingdom's borders, facing a coalition of neighboring troops determined to claim Elven land. Eldrick led the front line alongside Captain Thyriel, while Eloria stood behind her forces, ready to wield her magic as a formidable last line of defense. The battle that followed was fierce and relentless, each side determined to prevail. Eldrick moved through the chaos with precision, his commands rallying the elves around him, instilling in them a fierce loyalty. Under his guidance, Elven and human tactics fused seamlessly, their forces repelling the invaders with calculated strength. At a critical moment, when enemy reinforcements arrived, Eloria stepped forward, her staff raised high as she cast a powerful spell that swept across the battlefield, disorienting the attackers and granting her forces a decisive advantage. Her power, combined with Eldrick's strategy, turned the tide in their favor, and soon the enemy forces began to retreat. As the dust settled and the enemy forces withdrew, a victorious cheer erupted among Arinder's troops. Eldrick found Eloria in the aftermath, their eyes meeting in a moment of shared triumph. They embraced, the weight of the battle and the intensity of their bond surging between them. Their connection had not only saved Arinder, but solidified the strength they could achieve together. The victory brought more than just peace. It ignited a newfound respect for Eldrick among the elves. Many who had once viewed him as an outsider now saw him as a hero, his bravery and loyalty to their queen undeniable. Whispers of doubt faded, replaced by admiration and gratitude for the human who had risked his life for their kingdom. Even Lord Phaler approached Eldrick after the battle, bowing his head in reluctant acknowledgement. "You have proven your worth, Eldrick. Though I may not fully understand this bond you share with our queen, I cannot deny the strength you bring to Arinder." Eldrick inclined his head, a quiet respect passing between them. "My loyalty to Eloria is unwavering, Lord Phaler, and through her to Arinder. I will continue to honor both, as long as I am welcome here." That evening, Arinder held a grand celebration in honor of their victory. The elven city came alive with music, dancing, and feasting, a celebration that honored not only their queen and her bond with Eldrick, but the unity that had saved them. Eldrick found himself surrounded by elven soldiers and townsfolk alike, their gratitude a testament to how far he had come since his arrival. Later, as the night deepened, Eldrick and Eloria slipped away from the revelry, finding solace in the quiet of her private garden. Beneath the stars, they stood together, reflecting on all they had endured. "Our bond has withstood more than I could have imagined," Eloria whispered, her hand in his. "You have given so much, Eldrick. I wonder if I am worthy of such loyalty." He placed a gentle hand on her cheek, his gaze filled with devotion. "It is I who am honored, Eloria. I came here as an outsider, yet you welcomed me, fought beside me, and risked your throne for us. I would give anything for this bond we share." They shared a tender kiss, the weight of their journey and the strength of their love anchoring them in that moment. The future was still uncertain, the road ahead bound to be challenging, but their commitment to one another had never been stronger. In the weeks that followed, Eldrick and Eloria worked together to strengthen the alliance between Arinder and Eldrick's homeland, forging a partnership based on mutual respect and shared values. Their union became a symbol for both realms, a testament to the strength found in unity. Though there were still those who questioned their bond, Eldrick and Eloria stood as living proof that differences could be overcome, that love and loyalty could bridge even the deepest divides. Together, they began to lay the foundation for a legacy of peace, one that would reshape not only Arinder, but the wider world. In the months that followed their victory, Arinder blossomed under the shared leadership of Queen Eloria and Eldrick. What had once been met with skepticism, their alliance, their love, was now accepted and celebrated by many. Together, they worked tirelessly to strengthen the bond between their people, opening the doors of Arinder to new possibilities. Eldrick's influence had begun reshaping Arinder's understanding of humanity. He became not only an ally, but a symbol of the strength found in blending cultures, challenging assumptions that had long kept them apart. Elven craftsmen and human tradesmen began to work together, exchanging knowledge and skills, and soldiers from both sides trained side by side, forming a unified force that would protect their lands as one. Arinder's council, while once divided, had grown to respect Eldrick, many even embracing his place beside their queen. Even the staunchest traditionalists like Lord Phaler now looked upon him with a begrudging admiration. A formal ceremony was held within the Great Hall, acknowledging Eldrick's official role as Arinder's human ambassador and Eloria's chosen consort. During the ceremony, Phaler stepped forward, speaking on behalf of the council. "We once questioned this bond, doubted its strength, but Eldrick has proven himself beyond our expectations, showing us that loyalty and courage know no bounds of blood or heritage. As we look to the future, may this alliance be a reminder of the strength and unity." The words were met with applause, and Eloria took Eldrick's hand, her eyes shining with pride. Together, they had not only won acceptance, but had transformed the future of Arinder itself. That evening, Eloria and Eldrick returned to her private garden, where so many of their shared moments had unfolded. The blossoms glowed softly in the moonlight, casting an ethereal glow that felt almost like a blessing. They walked hand in hand, the weight of their journey lifting as they looked to what lay ahead. Eloria paused, turning to face Eldrick. Her gaze held a depth of emotion, a silent gratitude for the sacrifices and the strength he had shown. "Eldrick," she began, her voice soft, "there were times I thought this journey too difficult, that our worlds would never accept us. But you taught me that love is worth every risk, every trial." Eldrick smiled, reaching up to gently cup her face. "And you taught me that love can transform worlds, Eloria. I would face 1,000 battles to walk this path with you." They shared a kiss, a vow of devotion and commitment that needed no words. The world around them felt quiet, as though even the forest itself was witnessing the union that would shape its future. In the days that followed, Eldrick and Eloria began formal discussions to establish lasting ties between Arinder and Eldrick's homeland. Plans were made to send emissaries, build shared schools of learning, and create paths for travel and trade that would unite their people. Eldrick's homeland welcomed the alliance, intrigued and moved by the tales of Arinder's enchanted lands and its queen. As the seasons passed, the relationship between their two worlds grew stronger, guided by the example Eldrick and Eloria had set. Generations would remember the story of a queen who dared to love beyond tradition, and a human who fought beside her, united by a bond that defied boundaries. One morning, Eloria and Eldrick stood on the balcony of the Great Hall, looking out over Erinder as the sun rose. The kingdom stretched before them, bathed in golden light, the trees glistening with dew, a symbol of the new era they had ushered in together. Hand in hand, they looked over their kingdom, each lost in the quiet peace of a shared vision. "Our world has changed," Eloria said softly, her voice filled with wonder, "in ways I never could have foreseen." Eldrick turned to her, his voice steady. "And it will continue to change. As long as we walk this path together, there's nothing we cannot face." They stood there, bathed in sunlight, their hearts brimming with hope and a love that had become the foundation of their legacy. In that moment, they were not merely queen and consort, not simply elf and human. They were partners, their souls bound by a connection that had defied tradition and reshaped their world. As the sun rose higher, they stepped forward, embracing the dawn of a new era, ready to face the challenges and joys that lay ahead. Their love would be remembered for generations as the spark that bridged two worlds, forging a legacy of unity, courage, and the transformative power